Welcome to Chasing Time. I'm Tim Lewis, and today I'm chasing time at the Francis Perkins Center and Homestead in Newcastle, Maine. A warm welcome to my guest, Amanda Hatch, Executive Director here at the Perkins Center. It's so nice to meet you, Amanda.
Nice to meet you too.
I thought we'd start by looking back at those years Frances Perkins served as Secretary of Labor. Can you give us some insight and facts about those years when she worked with President Franklin D. Roosevelt?
Of course, those are probably the most well-known years of her life. It's said that when he offered her the position of Secretary of Labor, she came back with a list of policy priorities, and she said, "I will only consider this if you can agree to back me on all of these priorities." He, I guess, responded with, "Well, I suppose you're going to nag me about this forever." And she confirmed she would. So he agreed to those, and she was able, with President Roosevelt, to get almost all of them passed, and that's what we consider a lot of the New Deal era legislation. So it was things like the 40-hour work week, Social Security, of course, minimum wages, unemployment compensation, workers' compensation, the abolition of child labor, a whole swath of very important legislation that still impacts people today.
It really impacts people.
Absolutely. The one thing on her list that she was not able to pass, unfortunately, was universal health care. So that is what we at the center consider part of the unfinished business of the New Deal, something that she really advocated for, but it just wasn't possible to get through in that time.
And she was the first woman to have a cabinet post?
Correct. She was the first woman to have a cabinet post in the United States.
Wow, that's quite a landmark right there.
Absolutely. She was the first woman to do a lot of things before living and serving in Washington, D.C. She also worked in New York state government, and she was the first woman to hold some of the positions at the state level as well.
So that kind of laid the foundation for her public service.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, she was a remarkable woman, and back then she was a champion for women's rights. So that was landmark.
It was, and you know, at different periods of her life, she was a little bit more outspoken about that. We do have some quotes of hers regarding her take on feminism. But I think primarily she was working for all people and bettering the lives of the most people possible. Sometimes that was by focusing on women and women's rights and, for example, women workers in factories.
Right.
But sometimes that was actually more focused on children or on immigrant laborers, regardless of their gender. So I think that she was a humanist above everything else.
That's a good word to use. Yeah. Child labor, that was really abused back in the 30s, wasn't it?
Yes, and that's something that she was really passionate about from very early on in her career. She had seen firsthand some of the effects of poor working conditions, and especially on young children. And so she really wanted to put laws in place to prevent that from happening. If you read anything about her, you'll see that the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911 really jump-started her career. And when she was investigating what happened, it became clear that there weren't a lot of laws that were actually broken because they didn't exist. So she really advocated for putting those laws on the books, including ways to protect children and laborers in general, to make sure that they were protected, and if the employers broke the laws, they could be held accountable.
And those laws apply today.
Correct.
So she was an advocate back then.
Yes, absolutely. And many of them, they served as the basis for a lot of the laws that still protect people today.
You mentioned the minimum wage. I didn't realize she was involved in that then.
Yes, that was part of the New Deal legislation as well, was setting a minimum wage.
And apparently she and President Roosevelt worked very good together?
They did. He had pretty strong relationships with several of his cabinet members, but we know that he really trusted Frances Perkins. He trusted her opinions and especially her moral compass, I think. From what I've read, used her as a thought partner and would seek her advice on different policies and challenges that he was facing in the presidency because they had worked together for so long. I think that was trust that was built over a long period of time that she eventually also built with her fellow cabinet members, which is likely what made her so successful, was that she had the respect and the trust of those around her to help navigate the systems and really push legislation through.
So the continuity was good.
Right, yes.
With all. And she served 3 terms with President Roosevelt.
Yes, so she served for 12 years total, yeah.
Wow, that's quite a record too.
It is, yes.
So can we focus now on those years after Labor Secretary? What did she do in that period of time?
So she, first of all, wrote a book about President Roosevelt called The Roosevelt I Knew. So it is one of the more intimate biographies about him. It's actually quite interesting, too, because she was writing herself out of the narrative, which is why many people haven't heard of her. And she even did it in her own words. So in that biography, she credited Roosevelt with a lot of the ideas that were actually hers. So that was important because it came with an advance that she needed. So she focused on that, and then she was appointed to the Civil Service Commission by President Truman.
I see.
And she served in that role until 1953. And then after that, she continued to work throughout her long life, but it was primarily in academia, so some teaching. And lecturing positions.
Now can we focus on Frances Perkins' personal life, marriage, early college years, and what can you tell us?
So her personal life is, from a very young age, she was very close to her grandmother. And then eventually we know that she went to Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts, which was very important to her. She was her class president. She remained close with her class members. We've found several letters of her corresponding with them over the years. And so part of the reason the Mount Holyoke years were so significant was that the institution really encouraged the students to go into the communities and to observe some of the conditions, especially if they were interested in work about social significance of any kind. So that's where she really started to observe the working conditions on factory floors. She wasn't of a class where she herself was working in factories, but she was starting to see how dangerous that was and how impactful that was to the people working there. And then, you know, other parts of her personal life, we do know that she unfortunately had challenges conceiving a child, a miscarriage, a stillbirth, and she eventually did have a daughter, Susanna, her only child, and she was married to a gentleman named Paul Wilson. Interestingly, of course, she kept using her maiden name, Perkins, professionally, but when she would come here to Newcastle, she was known as Mrs. Wilson. This was kind of her private and personal space, which was very much separated from her public and political space where she was still Madam Secretary or Frances Perkins.
Was her husband a Maine native?
No, he was from the Chicago area.
I see.
Yep. So they really came to Maine because of her connection to the homestead and to the house. She inherited the homestead and the property here alongside her sister when her mother died, and it just was really important to her. They kept returning here year after year as a family. Even before she inherited it, she would come here with her daughter and her husband in the summer and disconnect from everything that was happening and that she was really moving forward very publicly elsewhere in her life.
And she was very close with her grandmother, am I right?
She was. She was incredibly close and very touched by her grandmother. So her grandmother inspired a lot of her actions later in life. She instilled some of her core values and taught her some of the skills that she would continue to use to her success throughout her life.
And she did use that all through her life.
Correct,
too.
yes.
Since we're filming at the Perkins Farm and Homestead, can you give us some facts about the saltwater farm?
I will say that the property itself is very interesting because it's been in the Perkins family for so long. And much like Frances Perkins herself, the family was very good at responding to the challenges around them and using the resources that they had to their success. So they would do the saltwater farming when that was no longer profitable. They were brick makers, and they made a lot of the bricks that you'll see in the few houses around here made of brick, including this one, were made here on the Perkins property. And when that was no longer profitable, they were doing some other farming on the land. So they really used the land itself to the Perkins family. That was where a lot of their wealth was. And they used the access to the land to further their lives and to keep it in the family and to make a living off of it.
So they multitask.
Correct, yes.
And the brick were used to build this house.
Yes, and it's interesting. I mean, it's not common around here to have brick houses. And in fact, even in the basement, there's a lot of bricks around the walls of the basement, which is not something that I've seen in many New England homes.
I frequently walk the hiking trail on the property, and I've noticed when I get down to the river, you can see a lot of the remnants of the bricks along the shoreline. And I guess that was quite common along the Damariscotta River.
Yes, it has a lot of the clay pits. And so that was a nice area to make. I think a few of the rivers, the brackish waters in Maine were used for brick making around that time.
And I see in the barn you have a wonderful display of Frances Perkins' remarkable career, newspaper clippings and books, and you get a pretty good flow of people coming through there in the summer.
We sure do, especially last year. Last year was our first year operating here at this site. And we saw a massive uptick in visitors when we announced our National Monument campaign last August. We were happy to have visitors earlier in the summer as well, but it really launched Frances Perkins and this place in particular into the national spotlight in a way that we were incredibly grateful for, because it not only led to an eventual National Monument designation, but it also just spotlighted Frances Perkins in a way that we as a nonprofit have aimed to do. That's a significant part of our mission, is to make sure that people know about her and her importance to every American's life, and then the importance of this place to her.
So that national monument was very significant recognition, wasn't it?
Yes.
And that was just signed by President Biden in 2024?
Correct, December. So we were one of the last that were designated in the Biden administration. And yes, incredibly significant. It was really a dream come true for not only the Francis Perkins Center, but Frances Perkins's last living relative, Tomlin Perkins Coggeshall, passed away in January of this year, but he was able to attend that ceremony. And so in a lot of the photographs, you can see him prominently seated right next to President Biden. So it was really meaningful to see him there, and I'm sure incredibly meaningful to him to finally see his grandmother get the recognition that he long knew she deserved.
Absolutely. And I see at the ceremony Angus King, Susan Collins, and lots of dignitaries there at that ceremony too.
Susan Collins didn't attend the ceremony itself. Shelley Pingree was there.
Pingree.
But she did write us a letter of support during the campaign, which we're very grateful for. All of the congressional delegation were incredibly supportive and helpful throughout that process.
Was that quite a process, getting that recognition?
It really was. It's something that normally takes a very long time, and we were able to make it happen in a very short time, which took a lot of staff resources, board support, donor support. Any form of support that we could get last year was massively helpful in making that possible.
Does that open the door to other possibilities, being a national monument?
We do know that the National Park Service is in the forever business. That's where you go if you want the place to last forever, that the administrations will change, public opinion about things will change. We even learn new things about history. So sometimes history will change in the way that we interpret it, but the National Park Service make sure that it is stewarded in a responsible way, that it can continue to be available to the American public. So we're excited about the partnership and seeing how it unfolds over the next couple of years.
So you have a student program here. Do you get students that come in on a field trip?
We do. In fact, we just had a group of 75 third graders here a couple of weeks ago. They were technically the first visitors to our brand new Visitor Welcome Center. Although they can't come in the house this year, we worked collaboratively with their teachers to build a really nice program that took them through the trails and the outdoor spaces, through the self-guided exhibit, and really helped them to interact with the history and the site and the nature in a way that was hopefully very meaningful for them, and something that we plan to replicate this summer to make the site more kid-friendly, family-friendly for families visiting us.
You also do some internship programs here?
We do. Our interns just began today. So we have 2 interns this year. We always have one from Mount Holyoke College, of course. And then this year we also have an intern from Bates College in Lewiston.
So what do they do, research and public service through that? Or?
Yeah, so those are the 2 internship tracks that we have available to highlight the 2 areas of interest. Is that, of course, Francis Perkins was a public servant. So part of our strategic vision at the Francis Perkins Center is to inspire the future generations to take up public service as a calling and to help provide them with the tools and the resources to make that happen. So that's one way we do it, is through the public service internship. And the research is really just to help promote Francis Perkins Scholarship, New Deal Scholarship, to keep that relevant, because it is still relevant today. There's a lot of topics that haven't been explored and a lot of ways that you can explore that alongside current events.
Right. This is a good question. If Frances Perkins was alive today, what advice would she give young people graduating from college? What would she say? What do you think?
I can guess what she would say. In my opinion, I think she would encourage younger people to continue to rely on their values, to make sure that they understand their own moral compass and their own values, and make decisions with that always in mind, that there are always going to be challenges that you're facing. You're going to be pulled in different directions, but you need to know where your North Star is in order to be successful. And then to keep working towards that success. She was very good at continuing to push forward and figure out the loopholes and build the relationships that she would later need to use to pass legislation, for example. So I think she would advise younger folks not to be discouraged and to just continue one foot after the other, working towards what they see as the higher calling.
Right, and those are good lessons. Also, I'd like to have you highlight the traveling exhibit, The Life and Legacy of Frances Perkins. What can you tell us?
So that's an exhibit that we lend out at no cost to other organizations. It recently was installed at the Margaret Chase Smith Library in Skowhegan, and it really goes over what the title says, her life and legacy. So a lot of what we're talking about today, this site itself and the importance to her and her family, all the way through her childhood and her Mount Holyoke years, and eventually what she was able to do in the Roosevelt administration, and how that's still impacting lives today. It's the same exhibit that you will see currently if you visit us this summer and do the self-guided exhibit in our barn at the National Monument. It's just a way to make that accessible to more people who can't make it to Newcastle, Maine. And it's an incredibly popular. We get more requests than we can fulfill, but we're excited that people want to share this in their communities.
Does that go statewide?
It's actually gone outside of the state before. We've shipped it to other states, or sometimes if it's somewhat local like Massachusetts, we can arrange a pickup drop-off, but it's definitely reached people outside of the state of Maine as well.
I bet. In the summer, where do you find, do you have a guest list that people write their names, where they're from? I was wondering what area do you find most people from?
Well, we know last year we have better information because we actually conducted a survey. We were collecting data to make sure that we were improving the visitor experience in a meaningful way. So we needed to know who was coming and why they were coming.
Right.
And it was a lot of folks from New England. So some people in Maine, but also New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts. We had people as far as California, some people from the Midwest. So there was actually people coming from all over. I think much like you would see if you walk down downtown Damariscotta this time of year, a lot of people in the area for vacationing already. And this year we won't be having a formal survey like that, but we will be encouraging people to sign our guest book and to provide us information or feedback that they have as they visit the center and the site.
And I'm sure you get good feedback too.
Yes, yes. We had a lot of great feedback. We talked to so many people last year too. So even if they weren't putting it in writing, I know I heard so many stories from people who were either so grateful for the experience or learned something new about Francis Perkins, all the way to someone who was friends with a grandchild of Eleanor Roosevelt and was telling me stories about her memories as a child visiting their home. So it really, we had a lot of people coming for different reasons last year.
My mother had a friend on the River Road, actually, that knew Francis Perkins, the family. And now I thought we'd take a look at the house. The renovations going on in the house, that will continue this summer?
Yes, so the renovations itself is almost completed. We had some significant ARPA funding and some other funding sources to renovate some of the spaces in between the house and the barn to accommodate collection storage and staff spaces, administrative spaces, but also to build out that beautiful visitor welcome center that will be open to the public this year. And what's going on the house this summer is more archiving and collections management. So while we won't be making significant structural improvements inside the house, we unfortunately can't have visitors inside this summer because there's a lot of things, of Perkins family things and Francis Perkins things that we need to know what they are and how to best care for them. So that's the process we're working through right now with some significant funding from the Mellon Humanities in Place grant.
I saw that. And that would fund some of that.
Yeah, so that's what's funding our archivist currently, and eventually we'll also fund a curator to then take that information and make it into exhibits and information for the public to understand and learn more. We're also, of course, partnering with the National Park Service. They own the building now, so any installations that we would install for next summer would be in partnership with the Park Service.
So the National Park Service officially owns this building, but not the farm, not the land?
Yes and no. The entire National Monument is the homestead, which was 57 acres was what was remaining in the Perkins family. And in order to become a national monument, we had to donate the land and the buildings itself so that it could be declared the monument. So the structures right here and the surrounding 2 acres are now owned by the Department of the Interior, the federal government, operated by the National Park Service. And then we retained the other about 55 acres of the property.
Well, it's beautiful property, and I'll repeat, I enjoy that walk to the Damariscotta River. That was a farm road I'm looking at, right, going down there.
Yep.
It's really nice.
It is, and it was important to Frances as well. So we encourage people to take the time to walk it. It's where she would find a lot of restoration, having these quiet, contemplative walks through the woods. And we actually have identified some spaces that were important to her. A prayer rock that she liked to sit on. Some of those you can find on our trail map, which is
I've seen those.
Great, yeah. And then some of them we will eventually update and have more information regarding some of the outdoor spaces in particular.
Well, it's beautiful property. It really is. And I noticed the wide fields as you're walking down. I suppose that was for their farming cattle? Or?
Likely it was, and currently also as part of the Mellon Foundation Humanities in Place grant, we're also conducting a cultural landscape report, which will give us a lot more information about the land itself, the historic use of the land, and eventually some recommendations on how to best preserve and interpret the land the same way that you would think to do it inside of the house.
That's true, because it's beautiful property. Well, it's very interesting. I've always been a Roosevelt fan studying when I was in school, and so this Perkins Center really intrigues me, and I've been to the barn several times last summer, and it's interesting.
We think so. We hope more people will visit, and we're happy to engage with. We get a lot of people coming to us through a Roosevelt connection. Because of course a lot more is known and shared about President Roosevelt, and he was such an important thought partner in her life. But we encourage people to think a little bit more critically too about the things that, again, he was credited with, that we can actually trace back to her ideas and her real policy making that he supported.
She was very humble.
She was. She was very humble and very private. So she actually preferred not to be in the spotlight. And I think that's part of the reason why sometimes her narrative in history is undertold, is partly the way that a lot of women's stories are undertold and their impact in history, but also partly because she chose to make it happen that way.
That's a good virtue. It is for anyone. Say, I'm looking at this beautiful painting in back of us here. That's really a nice portrait.
It is, yes. That was done and gifted to us by a local artist in Camden, Ruth Monsell, who also wrote a book that was published last year that has this on the cover. And she was kind enough to let us use this to design a sticker that is available in our gift shop this summer.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Is it? Yeah, that's a beautiful portrait. What year was that done? Do you know?
I'm not sure. She gifted it to us last year alongside, we had a book talk with her for the release of her book last June. So I imagine it was sometime around then, but I don't know the exact date.
It's a beautiful portrait.
It is.
It's almost like she's looking right at you. It's
it is.
real.
Yes. That's why we like it hanging there. Likely we'll move it out to the visitor center this summer so that more people can see it since they can't come into the house this summer, because it really is a nice interpretation of Frances Perkins and her demeanor.
It is. This room we're in now, what was this room?
This was a library sitting room. So these chairs behind us that we're not sitting in, she would actually sit here, and the front door was the door right outside of here. So she could see who was coming and calling when someone would come up to the door, the driveway, they'd pull in there. And so she would spend a lot of time here looking out the windows, much like we are.
So this really is what she regarded as home, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And that was a strong part of the reasoning behind making this place the Frances Perkins National Monument, as opposed to her birthplace in Massachusetts, for example, or her home where she lived when she lived in New York or Washington, D.C. we were really able to show that she considered this place her home, and it was so significant to her and her values and who she became later in life, that this is what deserved the recognition.
And it does. It deserves it, yeah. So I noticed in my research she's buried not too far from the house here on the River Road.
She is, yes, in a private cemetery, but it's right down the road, so likely if you were coming from the Damariscotta direction, you passed her resting place on the way here.
Is that a family plot, or?
She is buried alongside her husband.
So this was really a respite from that rush and tear in Washington, wasn't it? I mean, this was a place to come for peace.
It was, and according to her daughter and her grandson, she would come here and just take to bed for a full week. She would come straight in and just lay in bed, and then a week later she'd be ready to start seeing all of her friends in the area and doing some other things. But she lived a very active and significant life, public life, and so this was really the place she could disconnect from all of that. And in my mind, that's an important story worth telling, of, again, thinking about what she would say to the younger people. You can't just give and give and give forever. Sometimes you have to take a step back and rest and recharge.
That's the truth, yeah. And I see in my notes she was 85 when she passed?
She was, yes.
Was she active up until then?
She was. She was teaching at Cornell and up until around the time that she died.
Really?
Yes, yep. She continued to need to work, for one. Another important part of her story is that she wasn't from a wealthier class. She was from like a working middle class background. Again, back to the Perkins family having to live off of the land, and her parents eventually moved to Massachusetts to find another trade, operated a stationery store there. So she was able to go to good schools and to go to college. She wasn't, like I said, working on the factory floors, but she also wasn't inheriting a lot of wealth or leaving the president's cabinet with a lot of investments and a lot of savings. She really was living off of the wages that she was earning, and she therefore needed to continue to earn throughout her life.
Right. I was wondering too, Eleanor Roosevelt was very active public service. Was she and Eleanor, did they work together on any projects?
You know, I'm sure they worked together on projects behind the scenes. I can't recall if any of the big public projects were joint between them, but I know that they did have a lot of mutual respect for one another. They had wildly different ways of interacting with the press and public versus personal lives. Frances very much did not understand how Eleanor was so public about her life and would share these, what she considered intimate details about her home life and what was happening within the White House. And so that was very foreign to Frances, but they did have a lot of respect for one another.
Respect for each other. I'd like to read a quote from Frances Perkins. "The people are what matter to government, and government should aim to give all the people under its jurisdiction the best possible life." So those are nice words.
They are.
She was a very kind person.
She was. She was incredibly kind and incredibly spiritual. So a lot of, I think, what guided her in her work was this idea that we need to take care of each other, and everyone deserves the chance to be cared for and to have a safe and fulfilling life. And I think if you look at the roots of all of her policies, Social Security, unemployment insurance, bans on child labor, that all of those go back to that value of taking care of one another and making sure that everyone has the same opportunities and supports.
And those are good values today. I was taught those values when I was young. And I tried to follow them all my life. And it works. And it works good.
Yes.
Amanda, I was wondering, is there anything you'd like to add to the interview? Did I forget anything?
The only thing that I would add is that we are opening for our first season as a national monument this June. So June 19th until September 28th. We will be open Thursday through Sundays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. It is free to come and visit us, and that is one of the best ways that you can support us right now, is to come and visit us, tell us why you came, what interests you, what improvements could we make next year, but also so that we can show the value of this place and start to collect some of that data on how important this place is to Mainers and tourists alike.
Absolutely.
So I encourage anyone who's interested to please come and visit us this summer.
You have some wonderful books too. I bought a couple of the books.
We do. So we will have a retail shop available this summer as well.
And you have a new entrance coming in, I see.
We do. So a beautiful visitor welcome center that we're here to greet you when you come in, answer any of your questions. Please don't be shy when you come in. That's why we're here, is to engage with you, and again, to see what brought you here and what we might be able to answer or to add to that experience.
Yeah, so it's a good experience overall.
We hope so.
One other question, Amanda. How do people find out information about the Perkins Center? Can you tell us some angles for finding information?
Sure. The easiest way to find all of the information about the center, resources on Francis Perkins, the National Monument, and especially how to visit us is by going to our website, which is francisperkinscenter.org. That also has all of our contact information. So if you want to call us or email us to get more specific information, all of that is on our website.
So I think maybe I'll close the show down here, but I'd like to thank you for letting us come and film here at the homestead, and for you for taking the time to talk with us. And I compliment you and your staff and your many volunteers. I'm sure you have quite a few volunteers.
And our board in particular,
and your board,
yes.
To maintain this beautiful legacy of Francis Perkins. It's top notch. So my compliments.
Thank you.
I always like to close on a positive high, and I think this one fits this setting perfect. The secret of happiness is freedom. The secret of freedom is courage. So till we meet again, my friends, and stay forever young.